The sound of breaking glass silenced the crowded dance hall as Lucy Vaughn stood frozen in the center of the room, the torn fabric of her best dress hanging shamefully down her side where it had caught on a nail. Whispers spread like wildfire across the room, and she could feel the heat of judgment burning her cheeks as she clutched desperately at the ripped material. Sweetwater, Wyoming Territory, 1878, was not a place where a schoolteacher could afford many fine things. The blue calico dress had cost her 3 months' savings, and now it hung in tatters around her slender frame, exposing more of her petticoat than any decent woman should show in public. The Founders' Day dance was the social event of the season in their small frontier town. Everyone who was anyone had gathered in the newly constructed town hall, its wooden floors still smelling of fresh pine and polish. Lucy had spent hours preparing, arranging her chestnut hair in an elegant updo, even splurging on a ribbon that matched her dress perfectly. Now she stood mortified as laughter began to ripple through the crowd. Mrs. Henderson, the mayor's wife, pursed her lips disapprovingly. Several young women who had always resented the attention Lucy received from eligible bachelors barely concealed their delight at her misfortune. "Looks like our prim schoolteacher isn't so proper after all," someone remarked loudly enough for everyone to hear. Lucy felt tears burning behind her eyes. She'd worked so hard to build a respectable reputation since arriving in Sweetwater 2 years ago. At 22, she'd come west seeking independence after her parents' passing left her with little back in Boston. Teaching had given her purpose, dignity, and the chance to shape young minds on the frontier. All that careful reputation building was unraveling as quickly as the threads of her dress. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a tall figure moved toward her. Grant Callahan, the owner of the largest cattle ranch in the territory, cut an imposing figure as he crossed the dance floor. His dark hair was combed neatly for the occasion, though it curled slightly at the ends where it met his collar. His usually weathered face was freshly shaved, and he wore a proper suit instead of his working clothes. The crowd parted before him. At 30 years old, Grant wasn't just respected for his success. He was feared for his unwavering sense of justice and his legendary skill with both pistol and lasso. He'd built his ranch from nothing after returning from the war, and now the Double C Ranch employed half the men in town. Lucy had exchanged pleasantries with him on occasion when he came to school events supporting his ranch hands' children, or when they passed on the street, but they'd never shared more than polite conversation. She'd always found him intimidating, with his intense green eyes that seemed to see right through a person. Now those eyes were fixed on her, his expression unreadable as he approached. Lucy wanted to flee, but her feet remained rooted to the spot. The musicians had stopped playing, and the entire room held its breath as Grant stopped before her. She braced herself for more humiliation. Instead, he removed his suit jacket in one smooth motion and draped it gently around her shoulders, covering the torn dress completely. "May I have this dance, Miss Vaughn?" he asked, his voice quiet but clear enough that those nearby could hear. Lucy blinked in surprise, unable to speak. His jacket was warm from his body and smelled of leather and cedar. "The musicians seem to have forgotten their purpose," Grant said, turning to look at the band. The fiddler jumped slightly and quickly raised his instrument. The others followed suit, and music filled the hall once more. Grant turned back to Lucy, extending his hand. "I believe they're playing a waltz." Lucy hesitated, still clutching the edges of his jacket around her. "I cannot accept. Your kindness is appreciated, Mr. Callahan, but I'm not being kind," he interrupted, his voice dropping so only she could hear. "I've been working up the courage to ask you to dance all evening. This just gave me the excuse I needed." Something in his eyes, a vulnerability she'd never associated with the formidable rancher, made Lucy's breath catch. She placed her trembling hand in his, and the ghost of a smile touched her lips. He led her into the dance with surprising grace for a man who spent his days in the saddle. As they moved across the floor, the whispers faded. No one dared speak ill of anyone in Grant Callahan's favor. "Thank you," Lucy whispered as he guided her through a turn. "No thanks necessary." His hand was firm at her waist, respectful yet secure. "Though I must confess, I've been watching you since you first arrived in town." Lucy's eyes widened. "You have," the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. "Hard not to notice when the smartest person in Sweetwater arrives." "I'm hardly. You taught yourself bookkeeping to help farmers track their finances. You convinced the town council to order new textbooks when the old ones still claimed there were 36 states. And you taught Billy Peterson to read when everyone else had given up on him." His eyes never left hers as they continued to dance. "I notice things, Miss Vaughn, especially things that matter." Lucy felt her cheeks warm for a different reason now. "I didn't think anyone paid attention to such details. Like I said, I notice things." His expression grew serious. "Including the fact that your boarding house roof leaks and Mrs. Miller hasn't fixed it despite your multiple requests." Lucy's surprise must have shown on her face because Grant's expression softened. "Small towns have few secrets," he explained, "and my foreman's wife helps Mrs. Miller with laundry." As the music continued, Lucy found herself relaxing in his arms. The dance floor had filled with other couples now, and the embarrassment of earlier began to fade. "Would you allow me to escort you home this evening?" Grant asked as the waltz came to an end. Lucy looked up at him, searching his face for any sign of pity or mockery. She found none. "Why would you want to do that?" "Because I'd like to continue our conversation somewhere we won't be the center of attention." His voice was steady, but she detected a hint of uncertainty. "Unless you'd prefer not to." Lucy considered his offer. She barely knew this man beyond his reputation, yet something about his quiet strength called to her. "I would like that," she finally said. His smile transformed his face, softening the hard lines and making him look younger. Lucy realized with a start that she wanted to see that smile again. As Grant led her from the dance floor, she caught sight of herself in one of the decorative mirrors. His dark jacket dwarfed her small frame, but somehow she looked more dignified wearing it than she had in her intact dress. She stood straighter, her chin lifted. Outside, the spring evening was cool but pleasant. Stars blanketed the Wyoming sky, brighter than any Lucy had seen back east. Grant offered his arm and she took it, feeling the solid muscle beneath the fine shirt. "My buggy is just over there," he said, nodding toward a well-maintained vehicle with two handsome bay horses. "You came prepared for the dance," Lucy observed. "It's not every day Sweetwater hosts such an occasion." He helped her into the buggy before climbing up beside her. "Besides, a man needs to show his respect for tradition now and again." As they pulled away from the town hall, Lucy felt a strange mix of emotions. The night had brought humiliation followed by unexpected attention from a man she'd only admired from afar. Now she was riding alone with him through the quiet streets of Sweetwater. "I should tell you," Grant said as they traveled, "that my interest in you isn't sudden or born of pity." Lucy glanced at him, surprised by his directness. "I've watched you build a life here through determination and intelligence," he continued. "When others whispered that a city girl wouldn't last a month on the frontier, you dug in deeper. When the school board questioned your methods, you invited them to observe your classroom. You've earned every bit of respect you have in this town." "You make me sound braver than I am," Lucy said softly. "Tonight I wanted to sink into the floor and disappear." "That's not cowardice, Miss Vaughn, that's being human." He guided the horses around a corner. "Courage isn't about never feeling fear, it's about what you do despite it." The buggy rolled to a stop in front of Lucy's boarding house, a two-story building that had seen better days. Grant secured the reins and came around to help her down, his hands strong and steady at her waist as he lifted her to the ground. Lucy reluctantly removed his jacket, the night air immediately chilling her through the torn dress. "I don't know how to thank you enough, Mr. Callahan." "Grant," he corrected gently, "and you could thank me by allowing me to call on you properly. Perhaps this Sunday after church," Lucy hesitated. "People will talk." "People always talk," he replied with a shrug. "Question is, do we give them something worth talking about?" His boldness made her laugh despite herself. "You're not what I expected, Grant Callahan. Is that good or bad?" There was that vulnerability again, barely visible beneath his confident exterior. I'm not entirely sure yet, she admitted, but I think I'd like to find out. The smile that spread across his face was worth any gossip the town might generate. Sunday then, Lucy nodded. Sunday. As promised, Grant appeared at the church steps that Sunday, dressed in his finest clothes. Lucy had spent her Saturday mending her blue dress as best she could, though a patch was still visible along the seam. Grant either didn't notice or didn't care as he escorted her to dinner at the hotel restaurant, the finest establishment in Sweetwater. Over the next few weeks, Grant became a regular caller at Lucy's boarding house. He brought her wildflowers collected from the prairie, books ordered from Denver, and once a bolt of beautiful green fabric that matched her eyes. "I can't accept this," she protested when he presented the fabric. "It's too extravagant. Consider it an investment in education," he said with that half-smile she'd come to adore. "Our schoolteacher needs to be properly attired." Their courtship progressed through the warm summer months. Lucy found herself sharing stories of her childhood in Boston, of parents who valued education above all else, of her dreams to build a proper school in Sweetwater with real desks instead of makeshift benches. Grant listened intently to every word, offering encouragement and practical suggestions. In turn, he shared his own history, his Pennsylvania upbringing, the war years he preferred not to dwell on, and his journey west with nothing but determination and 2 horses to his name. "I failed more times than I succeeded those first years," he admitted one evening as they walked along the creek that ran behind the town. "Lost half my herd to disease, nearly froze to death my first winter, and came close to giving up at least a dozen times. What kept you going?" Lucy asked, her hand tucked into the crook of his arm. "Stubbornness, mostly." His laugh was self-deprecating. "And nowhere else to go. The war took something from me, a belief that the world made sense. I needed to build something that did." Lucy understood that feeling. After losing her parents to influenza within weeks of each other, she'd needed to create meaning from chaos. Teaching had been her salvation. As summer turned to fall, their relationship deepened. Grant began including Lucy in discussions about the ranch's future, valuing her insight on financial matters and planning. In turn, she invited him to school events where his presence lent weight to her educational initiatives. Not everyone approved of their courtship. Mrs. Henderson sniffed that Lucy was reaching above her station, while some of Grant's business associates questioned why a man of his standing would court a simple schoolteacher with no family connections or dowry. These whispers reached Lucy's ears, as gossip inevitably did in small towns. One crisp October afternoon, she raised her concerns as they rode in Grant's buggy back from a neighboring town where they'd attended a harvest festival. "I worry I'm causing you problems," she admitted, watching his profile as he handled the reins. "The Harrington brothers made it clear they thought you could make a more advantageous match." Grant's jaw tightened, but his voice remained even. "The Harrington brothers would sell their own mother if the price was right. Their opinion means nothing to me." "Still," Lucy persisted, "a man in your position, a man in my position," Grant interrupted, pulling the buggy to a stop and turning to face her, "has earned the right to choose his own happiness." "And Lucy," his voice softened as he took her gloved hand in his, "you make me happier than I've been since before the war." The sincerity in his eyes stole Lucy's breath. "I feel the same," she whispered. "Then that's all that matters." He lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to her knuckles. "The rest is just noise." As they continued their journey, Lucy felt a sense of peace settle over her. Whatever challenges they might face, they would face them together. Winter came early that year, bringing howling blizzards that swept across the territory. School was frequently canceled as snow made the roads impassable. During one such storm, Lucy sat by the window of her small room, grading papers by lamplight and worrying about Grant. He'd ridden out 2 days earlier to check on cattle in the high pastures, promising to return before the weather turned. Now the storm was in its second day with no sign of abating, and fear gnawed at her insides. Ranchers died in such conditions. It happened every winter. A knock at her door startled her from her thoughts. Mrs. Miller, the boarding house owner, stood there looking concerned. "There's someone at the door for you, Miss Vaughn. Says it's urgent." Lucy rushed downstairs to find one of Grant's ranch hands, snow crusting his beard and hat. "Miss Vaughn," he said, removing his hat, "Boss sent me. He's back at the ranch but took a bad fall when his horse spooked in the snow. Doc's with him now, but he's asking for you." Fear clenched Lucy's heart. "How bad is it?" "He's conscious and ornery as ever, which is a good sign," the man said with a small smile. "But his leg's broken bad and he's running a fever." Lucy didn't hesitate. "Give me 5 minutes to gather my things." The ride to the Double C Ranch was treacherous, the horse and wagon struggling through snowdrifts. Lucy barely noticed the biting cold, her mind fixed on Grant. By the time they arrived, her hands were numb despite her gloves, and her face felt frozen. The ranch house was larger than most in the territory, built of solid timber with a stone foundation. Light glowed from every window and smoke curled from the chimney. Inside, warmth enveloped her as Grant's housekeeper, Mrs. Figgins, hurried to take her coat. "He's upstairs, miss." "The doctor's just finished setting his leg." Lucy followed her up to Grant's bedroom, her heart pounding. She'd never been in this part of his home before. The room was spartanly furnished but comfortable, with a large bed dominating the space. Grant lay propped against pillows, his face pale and drawn with pain. His right leg was splinted and elevated. Dr. Harrison turned as she entered. "Ah, Miss Vaughn, perhaps you can convince this stubborn man to take his laudanum. He refuses to rest properly." Grant's eyes found hers, and despite his obvious pain, he smiled. "They're making a fuss over nothing." "A compound fracture is hardly nothing," Dr. Harrison muttered, gathering his supplies. "I'll return tomorrow to check the splint. Keep him still and watch for increased fever." With that, he departed, leaving them alone save for Mrs. Figgins hovering in the doorway. "That will be all for now, Mrs. Figgins," Grant said gently. "Miss Vaughn will call if we need anything." The housekeeper nodded and withdrew, closing the door behind her. Lucy moved to Grant's bedside, taking his hand between hers. "You promised to be back before the storm." "Nature had other plans," he grimaced as he shifted slightly. "The cattle were stranded higher up than expected. We got them down, but on the return journey, my horse stepped in a hidden hole." His expression darkened. "Had to put her down. 16 years together and I couldn't save her." Lucy heard the grief in his voice. "I'm so sorry." He squeezed her hand. "Life out here is precarious, we both know that." Lucy studied his face, noting the lines of pain around his eyes and mouth. "You need to take the medicine. It makes my head foggy. Better foggy than in agony." She reached for the bottle of laudanum on the bedside table. "Please, Grant, for me." He sighed but allowed her to administer the dose. As she helped him drink water afterward, he caught her hand. "Stay," he said quietly. "Not just tonight. Stay with me, Lucy. Be my wife." Lucy froze, certain she had misheard. "What? I had it all planned," he continued, his words coming faster now. "There's a ring in my desk downstairs. I was going to ask you properly at Christmas, with a fire in the hearth and everything perfect, but lying out there in the snow, not sure if I'd make it back." His eyes, intense despite the pain, held hers. Life's too short and too uncertain to wait for perfect moments. Lucy's heart thundered in her chest. "Are you certain it's not the pain or the medicine talking?" Grant's laugh turned into a wince. "I've been certain since the night of the Founder's Day dance. I've been certain every day since." Lucy studied the face she'd come to love, the strong jaw, the lines etched by sun and wind, the eyes that could be hard as flint with enemies and soft as summer skies with her. She thought of the man who'd covered her shame with his jacket, who valued her mind as much as her heart, who'd built a life from nothing just as she had. "Yes," she whispered, then louder, "Yes, I'll marry you, Grant Callahan." His smile was radiant despite his pallor. "Even without the ring and the proper proposal?" "Even without," she confirmed, leaning down to press her lips gently to his. "Though I won't object if you want to do it again later." The laudanum soon took effect and Grant drifted to sleep, his hand still holding hers. Lucy settled into the chair beside his bed, prepared to watch over him through the night. Outside, the blizzard continued to howl, but within the sturdy walls of what would soon be her home, Lucy felt only warmth and certainty. The next weeks passed in a blur of activity. Grant's injury confined him to bed, then to a chair, and finally to moving about with crutches. Lucy divided her time between the schoolhouse and the ranch, often bringing her work to complete in Grant's study while he managed ranch business from his makeshift office in the parlor. The announcement of their engagement surprised few in town. Most had seen it coming from the moment Grant had offered his hand at the dance. Still, there were adjustments to be made. Lucy arranged for a replacement teacher to finish the school year after their planned January wedding. Grant worked with his foreman to ensure the ranch would run smoothly during their 2-week honeymoon to Denver. Christmas arrived with a fresh blanket of snow that transformed the landscape into a glistening wonderland. Grant, now able to move about with a cane, insisted on a proper proposal despite Lucy's protests that it wasn't necessary. On Christmas Eve, he led her into the parlor where a massive pine tree stood decorated with candles, paper ornaments, and strings of cranberries. "The children from school helped decorate yesterday when you were in town," he explained, watching her face light up with delight. Beneath the tree sat a small package wrapped in silver paper. Grant guided her to the sofa and, with some difficulty, lowered himself to one knee before her. "I promised myself I would do this properly," he said, taking her hand. "Lucy Vaughn, you walked into Sweetwater 2 years ago and changed it for the better. You've changed me for the better. Your strength, your intelligence, your compassion, they humble me daily." He reached for the package and placed it in her hands. "I want to build a life with you, to face whatever comes together. Will you do me the great honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred Lucy's vision as she unwrapped the package to reveal a velvet box. Inside nestled a gold ring set with a single perfect pearl surrounded by tiny diamonds. "It was my grandmother's," Grant explained. "She crossed the Allegheny Mountains in a wagon as a young bride. She always said it took a special kind of woman to build a life on the frontier." "It's beautiful," Lucy whispered, her voice catching. "And yes, 1,000 times yes." Grant slipped the ring onto her finger, then pulled her into a kiss that promised a lifetime of tomorrows. Their wedding day dawned clear and cold in mid-January. The entire town turned out for the ceremony in the small church, followed by a reception at the newly completed school building, Grant's wedding gift to his bride. The structure boasted real glass windows, proper desks, and a bell tower that could be heard across town. Lucy wore a gown of ivory satin with the green fabric Grant had given her fashioned into an overskirt and trim. Mrs. Figgins and several other women had worked for weeks to create the dress, each stitch a labor of love for the schoolteacher who had touched so many lives. As Grant and Lucy exchanged vows, many in the congregation remembered the Founder's Day dance where it had all begun: a torn dress, a gallant gesture, and a smile that had changed both their lives forever. The years that followed brought challenges and joys in equal measure. The harsh winter of 1880 nearly bankrupted many ranchers, but Grant's careful management and Lucy's sharp financial mind kept the Double C Ranch solvent. When drought threatened the following summer, it was Lucy who researched and implemented new irrigation techniques that saved not only their land but many neighboring farms as well. Their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Lucy's mother, arrived in the spring of 1881. She had her father's green eyes and her mother's determined spirit. A son followed 2 years later, bringing Grant's vision of a legacy to life. In 1885, Lucy opened a small college in Sweetwater, offering advanced education to young men and women who couldn't afford Eastern universities. Grant donated the land and helped secure funding from business associates who had long since stopped questioning his choice of wife. Through it all, they remained partners in the truest sense, sharing decisions, respecting each other's strengths, and standing together against whatever hardships the frontier presented. On their 10th anniversary, Grant surprised Lucy with a party at the town hall, the same building where they had first danced. The entire community gathered to celebrate, bringing gifts and well wishes for the couple who had done so much to help Sweetwater prosper. As the music played and couples filled the dance floor, Grant led Lucy to the center of the room. She wore a beautiful blue gown, far finer than the one that had torn a decade earlier. Happy? He asked, his hand warm at her waist as they moved to the music. Lucy looked around at the life they had built, their children playing with friends nearby, the community that had become family, the man who had stood beside her through it all. Completely, she answered, her smile as bright as it had been the first time he'd offered his hand. Though I still think you got the worse end of the bargain that night, Grant laughed, pulling her closer. I got the best dance partner in the Wyoming territory. I'd say that was a pretty good deal. As they continued to waltz, Lucy reflected on how a moment of shame had led to a lifetime of joy. The torn dress that had once mortified her now seemed like fate's gentle nudge, bringing her together with the man who saw beyond appearances to the heart beneath. "What are you thinking about?" Grant asked, noticing her contemplative expression. "I was just remembering how it all began," Lucy replied. "How sometimes the things we think will break us instead lead us exactly where we need to be." Grant's eyes, still as intense as they'd been a decade ago but now familiar and beloved, held hers. "I knew from the moment I saw you standing there, trying so hard to be brave, that you were the woman I wanted to build my life with. Even with my dress in tatters, especially then," he confirmed. "When someone shows you their vulnerability and still manages to stand tall, that's true strength." Lucy leaned her head against his shoulder as they continued to dance, surrounded by friends and family in the town they had helped shape together. From a torn dress and an offered hand had grown a love strong enough to weather whatever the frontier might bring, and a partnership that would leave its mark on Sweetwater for generations to come.